Hi, hello. My name is Stephanie and welcome, or if you're coming back, welcome back. Either way, I'm glad you're here and I hope you're well. And it is once again the most wonderful time of the year. That's right, Dune season. So, with Dune Part 2 coming out soon, today we're talking about Dune and its many adaptations. So, spoilers for the Dune saga as a whole and all its adaptations, including but not limited to its 2021 and 1984 film adaptations, both TV miniseries Frank Herbert's Dune and Children of Dune, and the documentary Jodorowsky's Dune. All right, my sisters in the Bene Gesserit. Let us begin. So, Dune by Frank Herbert was first published in 1965 as two separate serials in the sci fi magazine Analog. The first serial would become Book One, Dune, and the second serial would become the second and final two books in Dune, Book Two, Muad'Dib, and Book Three, The Prophet, respectively. Dune, as we know it, was published on August 1st, 1965 by Chilton Books, of all people. So, if that name sounds familiar to you, it's probably because you've used one of their books, because Chilton is probably best known for their car manuals. I know back when I had my first car, they were an absolute lifesaver, right? So, how did a publishing company best known for their car manuals and their craft and hobby books end up publishing Dune, of all things? Well, because no one else wanted it, believe it or not. Dune was actually rejected by 20 different publishers before Sterling Lanier, an editor at Chilton who had seen the manuscript and liked it, convinced Chilton to take a risk and publish Dune. And they did. Now, this is the part where you're probably thinking I'm going to tell you that Dune was a hit right out of the gate, right? Well, that's definitely not the case in the slightest. The first printing of Dune that was sold for $5.95, put a pin in that. I'm going to circle back to it in a little bit. It did not sell well at all. That might be kind of surprising, or maybe kind of very surprising, considering just how massive an impact Dune has had, not just on science fiction, but on pop culture. But it literally sold so badly that Chilton Books considered it to be a write off, and poor Sterling Lanier was actually fired for it. And to go off on a bit of a tangent, Sterling Lanier was a really cool person in his own right. He was a speculative science fiction writer himself, a research historian, a trained archaeologist and anthropologist. You know, he was a World Fantasy Award nominee, and he was also a sculptor. His works have been exhibited in the Smithsonian, and he specialized in these really cool miniatures, including a series he made of characters from Lord of the Rings, a set of which he gifted to Tolkien himself, which, like, that is really, really cool. Like I said, he was a really cool, talented guy, and it's thanks to him that we got Dune, so thanks to Sterling Lanier. Speaking of which, back to Dune. Now, despite that initial first printing of Dune not being very successful, to put it mildly, it would eventually gain popularity thanks in large part to word of mouth, and would eventually become a huge success. And a year later, in 1966, Dune actually won the very first Nebula Award for Novel of the Year. And as of 2020, the most recent numbers I could find, and as always, all articles referenced and quoted will be linked down below. It has sold over 20 million copies and is the best selling science fiction novel of all time. And honestly, its impact and its influence really can't be understated. There are songs and entire albums written about Dune. My personal favorite is Iron Maiden's song To Tame a Land. The video game Dune 2, while it's not the first RTS real-time strategy game, the format that was used in Dune 2 is literally the template. It's the blueprint, and it laid the foundation for things like Warcraft and Age of Empires and StarCraft. You know, we talked about this in detail before, but we absolutely would not have the Alien franchise were it not for Dune. Or if we did, it would look very different from the one that we, know and love. Put another pin in that. It's influenced more novels and comics and TV shows and movies and games than I could list here in any kind of a timely manner. Without Dune, Star Wars as we know it would probably look very, very different. The Star Wars Dune connection actually runs very, very deep. You've got Arrakis and Tatooine, which are both these arid desert wastelands, as is the place I live. Kidding, but not as much as you'd think. With the former having two moons and the latter having two suns, spice exists in the Star Wars universe, although albeit a very different spice. And it is mined and smuggled throughout a galaxy far, far away. We have Paul and Luke, who are driven and in many ways damned by their respective destinies. In the original draft of Star Wars, the Jedi were actually called the Jedi Bendu, and we later get to meet a Force-sensitive entity who is called the Bendu in Star Wars Rebels, which you should watch, by the way, if you haven't. Here is my, usual peer pressuring people to watch Star Wars Rebels. So if you haven't, you should do that. In Dune, the Prana Bindu is a Bene Gesserit training method that leads to complete and total control of the nerves and muscles. And that's not even close to everything. Seriously, it's a lot. Hayao Miyazaki's Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind draws heavily from Dune in the way that it looks at ecology and the fall of empires and what happens when political machinations collide with theology and fanaticism. Again, if you haven't seen that, you should go watch it, especially if you like Dune. It is absolutely phenomenal. The fingerprints of Dune are all over science fiction and pop culture. My favorite manifestation of all this is what Tumblr does with the litany against fear. It's never not funny to me. Seriously, it is always just like the funniest thing. Here's some examples next to me. Now, before we talk about the beginnings of Dune's less than smooth journey, to say the least, to the big screen, we're going to circle back to the $9.95 copy of Dune. So, take it away live, but still pre-recorded me. Like I told you earlier, that first printing of Dune that Chilton put out did not sell well. In fact, it sold so badly it was considered a write-off, and the person who told them to take a chance on it was actually fired. But today, that first edition that sold for $5.95 is now one of the most valuable science fiction collectibles out there, and copies of it have sold at auction for upwards of $20,000. The edition I have here, and I'm going to try and do this one-handed, so apologies if you see all the junk on my desk, is what is called the Book Club edition, which is not nearly as valuable as that $5.95 edition, but it is still a really, really cool thing in my opinion. That first edition has the $5.95 on the dust jacket, as you can see. Mine does not, and it has green boards, whereas you can see mine has the red boards. And if you should come across it, you should send it to me, P.O. Box link down below. I am just kidding. I am absolutely just kidding, but if you do happen to stumble across one of them in the wild, because they do pop up sometimes randomly in used bookstores and things like that, you should definitely hold on to it because you do in fact have something quite valuable. Alright, back to pre-recorded me. Thank you for that live, but still pre-recorded me. So attempts to make Dune into a movie actually started as early as 1971, so only a few years after it was published, with Archer Jacobs of Abjact Productions, who produced Planet of the Apes and its many sequels. My favorite is Beneath the Planet of the Apes, for what that's worth to you. And for a few years, there was a revolving door of directors, writers, and producers, including but not limited to David Lean, who directed Lawrence of Arabia, and he was Jacobs' first choice for a Dune director, but he actually ended up declining, which was too bad because that would have been a really cool full circle moment, because Dune took a lot of inspiration from Lawrence of Arabia. And sadly, Jacobs himself actually ended up passing away in 1973, literally a year before filming was set to begin. So right away, we're off to kind of a rocky start. A year later, in 1974, a French consortium bought the rights to Dune and chose Alejandro Jodorowsky, who is, we'll say interesting. we'll go with interesting, and thus began a truly unhinged series of events that is best told by the documentary Jodorowsky's Dune, which is absolutely phenomenal and it tells the story better than I ever could. But to hit the broad strokes of what happened, the script that was put together for Jodorowsky's Dune would have been roughly the size of a phone book, and had the film been made as Jodorowsky intended, which was a hill he was willing to die on, it would have been something like a 10 to 14 hour movie, which Denis Villeneuve, should you ever see this or hear about it or whatever, that is my ideal Dune movie length. Just just putting that out there into the universe. And the team that was assembled was absolutely wild. Moebius created over 3,000 storyboards for the movies, and Chris Voss did the concept art. H.R. Giger did a bunch of the character and creature designs. Dan O'Bannon would have done the special effects. Pink Floyd would have done most of the music, which, like, I've never gotten over the fact that I didn't get that specifically. I'm a big Pink Floyd fan, and, you know, the fact that we could have had an entire Pink Floyd soundtrack in a Dune movie is something I'll never get over the fact that I didn't get. And I'm also assuming that's why we got Dark Side of the Moon in the first Dune trailer. I like that. That was a cool little nod to what had come before. And that's to say nothing of the cast, which included Mick Jagger as Fade Ralpha, Salvador Dali, yes, really, as Emperor Saddam IV, and Orson Welles as the Baron Harkonnen. Dolly actually wanted to be paid $100,000 a minute so that he would be the highest paid actor to ever be an actor, and to have a golden toilet throne because he was Salvador Dali. Even in the pre-production phase, Jodorowsky's Dune was a massive and insanely expensive undertaking, with $2 million of its $9.5 million budget being spent before filming even started. So when they finally went to present what they had to the studios, the project was canceled. And listen, while I am endlessly and utterly fascinated by Jodorowsky's Dune and what could have been and what it gave us, and make no mistake, it would have been a hell of a movie. It just wouldn't have been Dune. It would have not been Dune. And although Jodorowsky's Dune was not meant to be, from it we got Alien and the Xenomorphs. It influenced Star Wars and the Terminator and so many other things, and I think that's pretty damn cool. Oh, before we jump to 1984, we gotta talk about the book. But let me preface what I'm about to say by saying this. I'm not a lawyer, and I don't know really anything about copyright law. Okay? Okay. So, Jodorowsky presented the studios with this massive book full of concept art, set designs, and a storyboard for the entire movie. There's probably about 10 of these huge books out there, and every so often, one of them comes up for sale. And in November 2021, one of them was being auctioned off through the auction house Christie's for $40,000. Okay? $40,000. And someone bought it, but they didn't buy it for $40,000. They bought it for $3 million. Yeah, $3 million. When they usually sell for about $25,000. So who on God's great earth paid that? So it was crowdfunded by a crypto collective called the Spice DOA, who seemed to believe that because they had bought the book, they now own the rights to Jodorowsky's Dune, and could create NFTs, make the book public, which, between you and me, the book has been available online since at least the early 2000s, but yeah, okay, sure. And an animated film, as well as create original content from it. Which that is absolutely not how copyright works. Not in the slightest. I have many, many copies of Dune. That does not mean I own Dune and can make my own original Dune content. That's not how any of this works. They also said they might burn the book and then sell the video as an NFT, which I am not qualified to unpack any of that. Yeah. The Spice DOA actually ended up dissolving in 2022. Shocking, I know. I'm sorry, I'm trying not to be mean. And plan to try and auction off the book once again. And honestly, if you want to know what Jodorowsky's Dune would have been had it come to be, just read Metabarons. It's Metabarons. There, I just saved you $3 million. Alright, On to 1984. So, after Jodorowsky's Dune was cancelled, producer Dino De Laurentiis, who directed over 500 films throughout his career, purchased the film rights to Dune in 1976 and hired Frank Herbert himself to write the script for it 2 years later in 1978, which Frank Herbert did, and it ended up being about 175 pages, which translates to about a 3-hour long movie. I love that, as it should be. De Laurentiis originally hired Ridley Scott to direct, and his intention was to split Dune. Sorry, that was my cat. I don't know if you could hear that on your end, but that's my cat. He has some strong feelings about Dune he wanted to express, I guess. However, Ridley Scott ended up dropping out of the project to direct a small indie film that I'm not sure a lot of you have heard of called Blade Runner. So, Dune just sits there until 1981 because the film rights were about to expire. They basically had to do something with the rights that they had, or they were going to lose them completely. This is never a good situation, and it's honestly how you get things like Dragon Ball Evolution. I'm not even kidding. This is where David Lynch enters the picture, and it was actually Dino De Laurentiis' daughter Rafaela, who is also a producer, who recommended David Lynch after seeing his film The Elephant Man. Like Ridley Scott, David Lynch intended for Dune to be split into 2 movies, and Virginia Madsen, who played Princess Irulan, says that she was originally signed on for 3 movies. But as we know, Dune 1984 only ended up being a single film, and the production of Dune was absolutely massive. They built 80 sets across 16 sound stages. There were 20,000 extras, a crew of over 1,700 people. Bob Ringwood, the costume designer, was only given about 4 months to produce 8,000 costumes and ended up improvising and finishing up a lot of them literally just before scenes were filmed. Infamously, the Guild Navigator costumes were made from body bags that were donated by the San Diego Fire Department. Yep. And the production itself was plagued by numerous issues, including but not limited to various health issues of both the cast and the crew, losses of power and communications being down. The first cut of Dune ended up being about 4 hours long, and though David Lynch wanted to cut it down to about just under 3 hours, Universal Studios wanted your standard 2-hour movie, which leads to tons, I'm talking tons of scenes being cut, the plot being extremely oversimplified, and then voiceover was added to help alleviate some of that confusion that the cuts and the edits caused. Infamously, some of the theaters actually handed out a glossary of terminology for the movie. These crop up for sale every so often from time to time, and I would very much like to own one. But can you imagine going to see a movie and they hand you a glossary? They're absolutely wild. David Lynch's Dune opened on December 14th, 1984, and was given mostly negative reviews, and was actually even called the biggest disappointment of the year, which I think is kind of rude. As you know, I am a proud Dune 1984 apologist. Does it have its flaws? Yeah. Absolutely. But it also has some fantastic performances. Sets and the costumes are absolutely amazing. The soundtrack is phenomenal, and all things considered, they really condensed the story as best that they could given the constraints that they had. Is it weird and kind of macabre? Yeah, 100%, and I love it with all my heart. But, sadly, because of its poor reception, all plans for any Dune sequels were cancelled, and David Lynch has mostly distanced himself from it, and doesn't even really like discussing it, which makes me sad, because again, it brings me a lot of joy. Frank Herbert liked it, for what that's worth to you. So the quote from him that I'm going to read about the 1984 movie actually comes from the introduction of his 1985 short story collection, I. So if you don't see the article where this came from linked down below, that's because it's literally from my copy of the I. In the introduction, he says, I enjoyed the film even as a cut, and I told it as I saw it. Reached the screen is a visual feast that begins as Dune begins, and you hear my dialogue throughout it. I have my quibbles about the film, of course. Paul was a man playing God, not a god who could make it rain. He infamously did not like the ending of Dune 1984. And that was it. That would be the last time anyone attempted to adapt Dune for about 16 years. And Dune has often been called unfilmable. Understandably so, in my opinion. Dune is very, very dense. It is very, very lore heavy and grand and sweeping and epic. And honestly, being able to not only condense something like Dune, but still have it be coherent, and not only that, make it watchable to a general audience who may not be familiar with the source material, is an incredibly tall order. And prior to Denis Villeneuve's 2001 movie, the best Dune adaptation, in my opinion, is the 2000 Sci-Fi Channel miniseries Frank Herbert's Dune. It was directed by John Harrison and produced by Richard P. Rubinstein, who was a huge fan of the novel and had also adapted The Stand and The Langoliers, both by Stephen King, into miniseries that are both great, in my opinion. If you've never seen them, you should check them out. They're really good. Both Frank Herbert's Dune and the 2003 sequel, Children of Dune, which is a combination of Dune Messiah and Children of Dune, which, just as an aside, I think if we get more Dune movies, which we better, I think that that's how they should handle both the second and third books, just combine them into a single movie. I think both miniseries are great. The effects haven't aged very well, and the costumes are a little out there. I think it's camp, though. I don't know. They're honestly fantastic adaptations. The stories are condensed yet broad enough that it gets the main points across, and the performances are great. My personal favorites are William Hurt as Duke Leto and James McAvoy as Leto II. They're both phenomenal. And both Dune and Children of Dune were massive hits for the Sci-Fi Channel, then went on to win 2 Emmys for cinematography and special effects. And to this day, they are still 2 of the highest rated programs that have ever aired on the Sci-Fi Channel, and it's because of them and that success that Battlestar Galactica was possible. We love to see it. Now, there was another attempt at a Dune movie made way back in 2008 by Paramount with Peter Berg, the director of Battleship. You know, that movie, Battleship, with Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson actually attached as technical advisors, but once again, we have that revolving door of directors, writers, and producers until the project was dropped altogether a few years later in 2011. And that brings us to my parasocial bestie, Denis Villeneuve. In 2016, Legendary Pictures bought both the film and television rights to Dune, with Denis Villeneuve as the director. And to editorialize a bit on my part, as soon as I heard him talk about Dune and what the story meant to him, I knew this was the guy. And I was right, baby. I was absolutely right on the money with that one. And listen, if you're not new here or have talked to me in person or online for more than 5 minutes, you've heard me wax poetic about my love for the 2001 movie, so I'll just be brief here. Dune is phenomenal. It is sweeping and epic and beautiful with an amazing soundtrack and one of the best casts ever put together. I said what I said. And everything, the cinematography, the performances are sweepingly gorgeous. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. You can feel the love and the respect for the source material in every moment of that movie. Everyone involved not only understood the assignment, they nailed the assignment. Villeneuve's Dune was originally set to be released in 2020, but it ended up being delayed due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Sad, but ultimately the right call to make. Here's a meme I made in 2020 to express that sadness. Dune Part 2, which, fun fact, Léa Seydoux is going to be playing Lady Fenring, and she's the grandniece of Michael Seydoux, who would have produced Jodorowsky's Dune, and I think that's kind of neat. Also ended up being rescheduled. It was supposed to be released in October of last year 2023, is instead coming out in March of this year due to the 2023 Hollywood labor strikes. Again, disappointing, but we don't cross picket lines in this house. Denis Villeneuve's Dune was a commercial and critical success and ended up winning 6 Academy Awards. None for performance or direction, though, which is offensive to me personally, to be honest, at the 94th Academy Awards. So what does the future hold for adaptations of Dune? I hope a lot, honestly. With how successful the 2021 movie was, I hope that we get the entire original series adapted into movies. I want to see God Emperor of Dune in all its unhinged entirety in IMAX the way the good Lord intended. Can you imagine? All jokes aside, just kidding, I've got one more. But it's more of a suggestion. I recently saw the hit comedy Saltburn, and I think that Jacob Elordi should play Ferretin Carino. What am I basing that on? Nothing but vibes, baby. Nothing but vibes. I also think that Robert Pattinson should voice Leto II in the God Emperor movie. I'm waiting for your call, Warner Brothers. Okay, now all jokes aside, there's genuinely so many stories that could be told within the world of Dune, and there are endless ways you could do that. Side films, TV adaptation, limited series. Hell, I think there should be a Dune anime. The possibilities are literally endless. To the sisterhood of Dune folks, should this ever find its way to you, and you need someone to stand ominously in the background of your TV show, I've literally trained my whole life for that, and I have my own costume. Just putting it out there. Thanks so much for listening to all that, and until next time, stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.